Dear students, I am Dr. Ritu Sharma. I am an assistant professor at National Law University, Delhi. Today we are going to discuss an important module from research methodology, hypothesis. While discussing the module, we will be talking about the meaning and definition of hypothesis, the nature of hypothesis, the importance and use of hypothesis in research methodology. We will also look into the sources of hypothesis, the relationship between variables and hypothesis, the types of hypothesis, and ending the presentation with characteristics of a good hypothesis, hypothesis testing and errors in hypothesis testing. So, while we discuss what is hypothesis, we should start with the meaning of it. Hypothesis is usually considered as an important mechanism in research. Hypothesis is a tentative assumption made in order to test its logic or empirical consequences. If we go by the origin of the word, it is derived from the Greek word hypotythenia, meaning to put under or to suppose. Etymologically, hypothesis is made up of two words, hypo and thesis, which means less than or less certain than a thesis. It is presumptive statement of a proposition or a reasonable guess based upon the available evidence which the researcher seeks to prove through his study. A hypothesis will give a plausible explanation that will be tested. A hypothesis may seem contrary to the real situation. It may prove to be correct or incorrect. Hypothesis is needed to be clear and precise and capable of being tested. It is to be limited in scope and consistent with known or established fact and should be amenable to testing within the stipulated time. It needs to explain what it claims to explain and should have empirical reference. Godet and Hart have defined it as a proposition which can be put to test to determine its validity. And Lundberg says a hypothesis is a tentative generalization, the validity of which remains to be tested. In most elementary stage, the hypothesis may be any hunch, guess, imaginative idea which becomes the basis for action or investigation. Hence, a hypothesis is a hunch, assumption, suspicion, assertion or an idea about a phenomenon, relationship or situation, the reality of or truth of which you do not know. So, a researcher calls these assumptions or hunches hypothesis and they become the basis of an inquiry. In most studies, the hypothesis will be based upon your own or someone else's observation. Hypothesis brings clarity and specificity to a research problem, but it is not essential for all kinds of research. So, the formulation of hypothesis provides a study with the focus. It also tells you what specific aspect of a research problem to investigate. A hypothesis tells you what data to collect and what not to collect, thereby providing focus to the study. As it provides a focus, the construction of a hypothesis enhances objectivity in a study. A hypothesis may enable you to add to the formulation of a theory. It enables you to specifically conclude what is true or what is false. Lundberg observes, quite often a researcher hypothesis is a predictive statement capable of being tested by scientific method that relates an independent variable to some dependent variable. So, once we know what actually hypothesis mean, we should also understand the nature of hypothesis. The hypothesis is a clear statement of what is intended to be investigated. It should be specified before research is conducted and openly stated in reporting the results. This allows to 1. Identify the research objectives, 2. To identify the key abstract concept involved in the research, 3. To identify its relationship to both the problem statement and the literature review. And a problem cannot be scientifically solved unless it is reduced to hypothesis form. It is a powerful tool of advancement of knowledge consistent with existing knowledge and conducive to further inquiry. It can be tested, verifiable or falsifiable. Hypotheses are not moral or ethical questions. It is neither too specific nor too general. It is a prediction of consequences. It is considered valuable even if proven false. Once we have understood the hypothesis, the nature of hypothesis, why is it so important in research? So, now we are going to discuss the importance of hypothesis. So, hypothesis, though an important part of research, may not be required in all types of research. The research which are based on fact finding like historical or descriptive do not need hypothesis. Hilve says that when act finding alone is the aim of the study, a hypothesis is not required. Whenever possible, a hypothesis is recommended for all major studies to explain observed facts, conditions or behaviors and to serve as a guide in the research process. Hypothesis facilitates the extension of knowledge in an area. They provide tentative explanation of facts and phenomena and can be tested and validated. It sensitizes the investigator to certain aspects of their situation which are relevant from the standpoint of the problem in hand. Hypotheses provide the researcher with rational statement consisting of elements expressed in a logical order or relationship which seeks to describe or to explain conditions or events that have not yet been confirmed by the facts. The hypothesis enable the researcher to relate logically known facts to intelligible guesses about unknown conditions. It is a guide to the thinking process and the process of discovery. Hypotheses provide direction to the research. It defines what is relevant and what is irrelevant. The hypothesis tells the researcher what he needs to do and find out in his studies. Thus, it prevents the review of irrelevant literature and provides a basis for selecting the sample and the research procedures to be studied in the study. Hypothesis implies the statistical techniques needed in the analysis of data and the relationship between the variables to be tested. It also helps to delimit researcher's study in scope so that it does not become broad or unwieldy. Hypothesis provides the basis for reporting the conclusion of the study. It serves as a framework for drawing conclusion. In other words, we can say that it provides the outline for setting conclusion in a meaningful way. So, hypothesis has very important place in research, although it occupies a very small place in the body of a thesis. So, once we are done the importance of hypothesis, we should also be seeing that how we can actually derive hypothesis. A good hypothesis can only be derived from experience and research, though hypothesis should precede the collection of data, but some degree of data collection, literature review or a pilot study will help in the development and gradual refinement of the hypothesis. A researcher should have quality of an alert mind to derive a hypothesis and quality of critical mind of rejecting faulty hypothesis. The following sources can help the researcher in coming up with a good hypothesis. 1. Review of literature. Review of literature is very important in forming a hypothesis because you get an idea of what type of hypothesis you need to achieve your objectives, and discussion with the experts in the given field to understand the problem, its origin and objective in seeking a solution will also help you in forming a very good hypothesis. Intuitions of the researcher also sometimes help in forming a good hypothesis because you always have an idea what you are looking for in your research, and that actually helps you in forming a good hypothesis. Previous empirical studies done on the given area also become a very good source for hypothesis. When you go through the previous researches, that actually gives an idea what you have to look into when you are conducting your own research. Once we know the sources of hypothesis and we have formulated the hypothesis, we should also understand what all types of hypotheses are there in research. So, research problems are too general by themselves to enable us to carry out meaningful analysis. They need to be specified in a more focused way. Hypotheses are specific statements that relate to the problem, the answers to which are likely to be yes or no, depending upon what is uncovered from the research. Like suicide is related to general level of religiosity or secularization of society. Another example could be alienation and political participation are negatively related. Such statements specify links between different phenomena. In order to explain different pattern of behavior that appear to occur, such statements specify links between different phenomena in order to explain different pattern or behavior that appear to occur. However, such pattern or association do not necessarily demonstrate that a causal relationship exists. We cannot, for an instance, say socio-economic deprivation causes suicide. If that was the case, then all those who defined by various yardsticks as living in a state of relative poverty would inevitably commit suicide. This is very unlikely to happen. So, if we have to understand types of hypotheses, we do need to understand what are the variables that actually affect these type of hypotheses. So, to understand the type of hypothesis, we need to understand the concept of variable first. The variables are empirical properties that take two or more values, or in other words, a variable is any entity that can take on different values. It's in simple terms, anything that can vary or that is not constant can be considered a variable. For instance, age can be considered a variable because age can take different values for different people or for the same person at different times. Similarly, country can be considered a variable because person's country can be assigned a value. A variable is a concept or abstract idea that can be described in measurable term. In research, this term refers to the measurable characteristics, qualities, traits or attributes of a particular individual, object or situation being studied. Variables differ in many respects, most notably in the role that they are given in our research and in the type of measure that can be applied to them. The statement of problem usually provides only general direction for the research study. It does not include all the specific information. There is some basic terminology that is extremely important in how we communicate specific information about research problem and research in general. So, weight, height, income all are examples of variables.